And you're being challenged in a way, but not in a bad way. Because if I'm asking you, well, what is so lovable about you? What's the question? What is so lovable about you? There are things. There are things. You might think like, well, I'm nice. Lots of people are nice. What else? I'm loyal. Lots of people are loyal. What else? Now, but I would suggest to you that it's good to think about this. Because what you might come to realize is that there are lots of wonderful things about you that do mean that you should be loved. But you can't know what they are unless you think about them. And a lot of times I'm going to bet you it's probably not even necessarily the things that we think that they are. It's only when we think more deeply about that. It's kind of like asking, why would you be remembered? Have you done anything to be remembered? That isn't a way of saying, sit down and shut up. It's a way of saying, perhaps, maybe do something that you would be remembered for. And then same with success, of course, we have to figure out what that thing is. I wasn't expecting it to come up with this one, but we did. In other words, we want to be better than other people. We want to feel like we matter in some way. Now, maybe we can go back to immortals. So, what else might immortals want? So they want to be ruled. So they want to rule. They want to be followed. So anything else that immortals want? Company. Ooh. How do you mean that? Yeah, if you're God, who do you keep company with? You're out there in the universe. Well, you're out there before there's a universe. You're kind of like chilling. And now you're by yourself, you're hanging out for eons and eons and eons. There's something when you guys are in a couple of years in another course, we can talk about what it is that God lacks. And there's something really closely connected with this idea of company there. The idea would have to be that God would have to lack something. Like, why would God, you ask that question of like, why is there a universe? And people will say, well, because God created it. Why would God create a universe? Why would he do that? Because in order for God to be God, it would mean that he'd have to have everything. He would have to lack nothing. But if you go create something, why would you create something? The only reason to create something is because you lack something. So you're creating to fill in the void of something that you're lacking. We made dry erase boards and dry erase markers because we were lacking something. It's the only reason to create something. And then if you think about it that way, well, geez, now a whole bunch of other things can kind of start to fill into your mind. If you realize, again, that creation necessitates lacking. So now, if any of you guys are, create something, you're a dancer, you're an artist in some way, you're a musician, you're a painter, the question is, what are you lacking that artist is filling up for? And if you guys want to have children someday, you want to create a child, there comes that question, what are you lacking that child is going to take the place that is going to fill in the void of? Because there is a lack that's there. Lacking doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing. It's just worth figuring out what it is. So that way you can figure it out. Because once you know what you're lacking, well, now you can start to fill in that void. Hopefully not with bad stuff, but with proper things. So the point here is that mortals and immortals want very different things. You notice what shows up very first and foremost on our mortals list, to survive. Because if you can't survive, none of this other stuff can happen here. It's hard to be number one if you're dead. It's hard to love and to be loved if you're dead. Even to be remembered. You can't know that you're remembered if you're dead. Maybe you might think that you're going to be. It was this class, right? Where I talked about that Van Gogh. Yeah, something like that. Wouldn't it be neat if we could all do that at some point, to go into the future and find out how we're remembered, what people think about us? I'm sorry, did I say wouldn't that be neat? Wouldn't that be tragic in some cases? You can't, and unfortunately, as I was pointing out earlier with Stoicism, you can't know how you're going to be remembered. It's impossible to know. You have to be able to go in the future, and then you have to know what people are going to think about you. Imagine George Washington and Thomas Jefferson dying and being like, we founded a very strong republic. We've given people this opportunity, this constitution that elevates the individual. And we think that hopefully this is a thing that's going to take hold all over the world and usher in a new age of enlightenment and understanding between human beings. And now fast forward a couple hundred years and people are tearing down their statues. We cannot know what our reputation is going to be. Even if you think, well, I can do the right thing, and if I do the right thing, then my reputation is going to be good. No, because the right thing according to you, and even according to your generation right now, is going to turn out to be a horrible thing a couple hundred years from now. Or hell, maybe even 10 years from now. And as I've said, I bet that one of the problems that you guys are going to have with your children is that your children are going to think that you're horrible, disgusting human beings because you eat meat. How could you have eaten an animal? Oh my God, because you're going to have synthetic meats in the future. How could you have done that when it was destroying the planet? Did you even care about me or the future? You're terrible people. Your children are going to judge you very harshly. One of the reasons we should be very careful about how we judge people. Because you don't want to be judged by the same standard that you use, believe me, most of us. And so you can't control your reputation because you can't control the future. You can't control changing attitudes. So you can't. So maybe that success. We have to figure out what that means. You see how the things that the gods want are pretty concrete. They don't need definition, and they're not really dependent on anything. They want to rule. How do you rule? Well, you pretty much understand what that means. You're in control. Check. They want to be followed. Worship. What does that mean? You pretty much understand what that means. Pretty clear. Check. They want people, company. Maybe to be in the presence of other gods. Maybe to be in the presence of mortals, because you can't be really worshipped unless you're followed by mortals. So now that tells us there's something that might be lacking in the gods, that they desire the worship of something lesser. I mean, isn't that kind of what this is as well? We want to be dominant, and we can't be dominant unless there are lessers beneath us as well. So we want to create, in a certain sense, we want to try to elevate ourselves to the level of gods and maintain everybody else, let's say, at the level of mortals. We come in first, we're a god among men. Then everybody else is below us, so they're the mortal versions of that. Perhaps. But now, in a certain sense, think about the things that we really desire. We take these things to the extreme, especially this thing with being remembered. So I guess we could say this thing about success. We want that. We want all the best. We want to be rich. We want to be famous. We want to be successful. We want to be loved. We want adoration. We want all of these things. And those are the kinds of things that the gods want. Now, what is the one thing that gods don't have to worry about? Dying. How long is it going to take them to get there? As long as it takes. So in other words, they can dream big because they're not worried about the mortal aspect. As humans, well, we have to worry about the mortal aspect. Well, what if I go for it and I don't make it and I waste my life since I've only got one? If the gods waste 1,000 years, that's okay. They've got eons more. They're immortal. If you waste, 20 years of your life, that's a chunk of your life, man. That's a lot of it. So you have to be careful about what you go after. So that might be the thing that Seneca is getting at here, that we, as humans, we dream huge. But you can't get huge things if you're worried about the mortal things, the small things. Your risk has to, if your dream is big, your risk has to be big also. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. If I told you, hey, there's a chance, think about your biggest dream. And I said to you, if you go for it, 10% chance you're going to make it. But you've got to risk your life to do it. Are you willing to risk a 90% loss of your life? Maybe. That would be thinking like a god. That would be thinking like a god. So you're saying there's a chance. Yeah, it's 1,000,000 to 1. But there is a chance. Yes, go for it. That's thinking like an immortal. The mortal thinks like, well, hold on a second. Maybe I should, maybe I should go more slowly. Maybe I should be more careful about it. Maybe. But that's for each person to figure out for themselves. The truth is, most people do go this route. And I guess it makes sense, because if you're immortal, you're going to do mortal things. To be able to be immortal and to do godlike things, geez. Well, that's who ends up in the history books, isn't it? Those are the people who we have posters of on our walls and we admire because they went for it. And they didn't just go for it, by the way. They got it. Does anybody have a poster on your wall of someone who went for it and failed? Probably not. Because imagine how many posters you'd have to have on your wall. Who's that? Oh, that's some guy named Bill Matthews. Who is he? Dude, he started a band back in 1998. Him and his, they moved from Oklahoma to Los Angeles, and then how'd they do? Oh, they didn't do very well at all. Yeah, they had like 3 gigs, they broke up, and he got a job, and he works at Walmart today. Why does he have a poster on the wall? Because he went for it. Oh, there's too many of those folks who didn't, that's an important point. It isn't that what they did wasn't admirable. It's that what they did isn't remembered because there's too many of them. How can you possibly remember all of the people who didn't make it? And we only remember the ones who rose to that godlike status, dominance. And so, you act like mortals in all that you fear. Well, we're afraid we're going to fail. We're afraid of what other people think about us. Do you think that gods really care what you think about them? Do you think Zeus sits there and says, I don't know, man, if I do this, Scalen's going to talk crap about me in 2,000 years? No, he doesn't care. Any more than the lion cares what the ox has to say. Of course not. The lion only cares about what the lion has to say. Maybe what other lions have to say. Perhaps, probably not. Gods don't care what mortals have to say. Interestingly enough, they do want to be worshipped, of course. But that's because it's the natural order of things. What do you do with something that's greater than you? You admire it. That's all that they're saying, is this is the natural order of things. This is what should happen. You look at LeBron James, this guy's I have no respect for the guy as an individual, as a human being. But is he one of the greatest to ever play, perhaps greatest? Yeah, of course. You can still admire it and not like the person. And then sit there and go, well, if they rose to that status. We should just be careful about what statuses people rise to and the kinds of things that we admire in people. I was just talking earlier today to a class. Any of you guys watch like reality shows like Survivor? It's one that pops into my head. You guys know the premise of Survivor? I think so. There are other shows like that. I think Big Brother's one of them too. And kind of like any reality show where people get voted out of the show. And I remember there's, I've never owned a television, but I've heard of some of these shows where, and I saw this clip of a guy, and it was an old version of it. I want to say it was Survivor, of a guy who's incredibly manipulative. So when they're talking to him, like in the individual interviews, he'll be saying, oh yeah, I'm lying to these people, I'm manipulating them, I'm playing on their emotions, and then they cut to that person interacting with the group, and the person's like, hey look guys, we're a team and we got to pull it together. If we're going to make it, we have to make it together. And everyone's like, yeah, I absolutely agree. But the whole time he's manipulating, deceiving, lying to them. And then that person will win, and they'll win $1 million or whatever the prize is, and I've heard people say things about that, like, well, a real piece of crap, but you know what? You got to admire the way they played. They played the game, and people go, yeah, they played the game. So you want to reward people for playing the game deceitfully. You want to reward people for being manipulators and liars and backstabbers and put them on television and elevate them up to the kind of thing that we then go on to admire. And you think that won't have an impact on how people behave in the real world? If you lift up something like that and say, that's what we shall all be like, well, of course, people who are watching it will say, oh yeah, you're right. And they'll spark to it because they'll see the success in that. They'll see that they're going to be remembered because they see that people will talk about them and that they'll be remembered for having won. Of course, they're surviving in the sense of that show. They're dominating because they're winning, but maybe they can find out that they're lacking this one thing. Essentially, they're lacking all the things. They're gaining all the things that are God's. Maybe we should be very careful about the people who we elevate to God's status. Maybe we shouldn't talk about people just because they do something infamous. Maybe it should be for something good. And then maybe that's the kind of thing that elevates the character up, because the gods overall should be something that we aspire to be like, to admire. We see these positive characteristics in them. And hopefully we're going to want to mold and shape our lives to do that, to be like them. Because if you mold and shape your life to be like a human, there's nothing wrong with that. Just understand that humans are flawed. Understand that humans are flawed. And when you admire a person, you have to accept that and not turn from them just because they were flawed. I don't think you can name a single historical figure I couldn't find problems with. But then you understand what that means if we just say, well, everyone's problematic, so you have no role models? So you're going to go through life with nothing to aspire to? How do you think that's going to turn out? You're going to make your own mistakes all along the way, which means that you're going to fail lots of ways, which means you won't be someone who's worth admiring. But you're going to have children someday. And you want to raise children in a household where there's no one for them to aspire to be like or to model themselves after? I'll ask the question again, how do you think that's going to turn out for you, for them, for society? There's no good end to that. So we do need these people to admire and to aspire to be like, even if they're flawed in certain ways. So we act like mortals in all that we fear. We fear failure. We fear the opinions of others. We fear not being dominant. We fear not finding love. We fear not being remembered. And a lot of people, by the way, fear success. It sounds strange to people, but people do fear success, and we fear dying. And yet we dream huge. We want the things of God's, but we act like mortals. If you want the things of God, you need to behave like gods. And if you want the things of mortals, you're content to be a mortal. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But man, there's some cool stuff over there. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Yes.
I was thinking like there's been a moment, like not necessarily like immortals or like us, but like someone that's like really successful, like most of the time they're like alone, like not alone, but they're like the reason that happens is because like we have to do what they have to do, but like to get there.
It's what you have to do to get there, but it's also what you have to do to be there. I think about Elon Musk just because this video popped into my head. I don't know how you'd find it, but I imagine if you went into and you typed in something like Elon Musk at work. How do you suppose Elon Musk works? Yeah, it's probably a lot. And then when you see him at it, so I saw a video one time. I'll just cut to the chase. I saw a video one time of him walking through I think it was SpaceX. I'm sorry, not SpaceX. Tesla. And the guy is walking with purpose, like he has to be somewhere. The guy walks through the place like this. And when he goes around people, he moves around, it's like he's coming at you. You just feel like you have to kind of hide. And he's just kind of going, he's talking to the people he's talking to, and he's getting to where he has to get to. That guy's like that all the time. The only time he seems calm is when he's doing interviews. But the guy's always, he has some place he has to be. How difficult do you suppose it is to be around a person like that? Because anytime you sit there and you take some downtime, that guy's not taking downtime. So then you like to keep up, you have to keep going. And then if you're going to be in a relationship with someone like that, well, forget it, because there's the kids have a baseball game this weekend. Well, he's not going to make it. He has a meeting he has to be at, or he has a sales thing he has to go to, or he has to go check their production lines in Indonesia. That person is constantly moving. That person is constantly working. How many people are like that? Well, we can name them. We know who they are. And those people could never quite get along. Well, maybe, I guess, to a certain extent that they can. But the point is that it's very difficult to be around people like that. Imagine being around, I go back to LeBron James. I don't know for a fact, but I would bet. If you go back and you see that guy in his teens and early 20s, what was he probably doing?
Basketball.
Yeah. And by the way, I didn't have to say when. I just had to say, what was he probably doing? Playing basketball. Was he awake? Yeah. Okay, so he's probably playing basketball. Well, what about when he was in school, Cameron? What was he thinking about? Basketball. It was going on in his head. He could probably, sometimes I can see some of my students where I'm thinking of one person several years ago in particular who was sold out to his sport. And this guy, he was a basketball player, and when I was talking in class, you could see him like, he wasn't listening to a word. I mean, he was kind of hearing what I was saying, but he was playing basketball in his head, and you could see his hands going. You could see his body moving, cutting through defenders and all that. So even when he was in here, he could kind of dedicate some portion of his mind to what was going on here, but the rest of his mind was all towards playing. And there are people like that. Some of you who are listening to me talk right now, you're not listening to a word I'm saying. You're thinking about a song or something that you want to create. You're thinking about the thing that you're passionate about. Hopefully. But think less about that in this class. Think more about that in your math class, because you don't need that. But you get the idea. Being around people like that can be very difficult. And so in other words, if someone's going to be great, it's difficult to be around. It's one of the reasons that the gods might want company, because we can be around them. There are a lot of people like that. Yeah.
So it's to the point where you have to choose a lot of money and be wealthy, or be like sociable, I guess you could say. Like,
yes. Yeah. This is one of the great lies that we've told ourselves. You can have it all. You can have both. You can have the career. I'm not just talking about the strong career. I'm talking about the career that's always trying to climb this dominance hierarchy. You can have all of that, and you can have a family, and you can have this great balance between all. No, you can't. Not possible. You can't. You know? And you might say, well, but that's not true because, you know, like my uncle, who I would bet he's probably not Elon Musk. He's probably not doing those things. Maybe he can devote some time to it, but we've talked about that. If you're out there and you're trying to earn hundreds of thousands of dollars in a career or in a business, you're dedicating a lot of time to that. You can't have a balance. It's going to be skewed. That doesn't mean you miss everything that your family does, but it's not quite the same. Now, turn the other way, you know, maybe your career is going to suffer, but your family gets a lot of attention. But the fact of the matter is you're going to have to pick both. And if you say that balance, well, then you're half-assed at both. Or, maybe that's a mean way, well, not maybe, it is a mean way of saying it. I say it provocatively for a reason. Or maybe it's just that you're not going to be able, you're half in your job, so then you're going to miss promotions, and you'll probably be pissed off at your boss because your boss is stupid because he didn't promote you or whatever. And then you're also going to miss some things at your family because you're trying to get those promotions. You're going to be teetering on this, on the seesaw between the two. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that if that's the life that you choose. There's nothing wrong with this if that's the life that you choose. But that's one of the things that screw it, I'll tell you. It'll offend, well, it should offend some of you if you're a thoughtful person, but I hear my students all the time talking about, man, I'm going to make it, I'm going to stack cash. You can't write a journal for 10 minutes. And you think you've got the commitment to spend 70 hours a week focused on a single project? You can't write for 10 minutes in a page. You can't commit to that. It's because I don't want to. Oh yeah, that's why. Don't want to. I don't want to engage in the greatest ideas of human beings who have ever lived. Then you're not a thoughtful person. You're either not a thoughtful person or you're not a hard worker. Both of those are going to be a death sentence if you think you're going to stack cash and be a god. You know. I know. Come back and talk to me in 10 years. Let's have a discussion then. Or maybe I'll run into you at work, perhaps. But that isn't a way of saying, therefore, you're a terrible human being. It's a way of saying, therefore, know yourself. Know who you are. If you can't commit 10 minutes to writing in a journal, what does that mean about you as a human being? Nothing bad. It doesn't mean you're a piece of shit human being, but for some reason when we hear that, we think it's a horrible criticism. Of course we do, because that's the guilty conscience that says it, because you know it's true. But I'm not telling you you're a terrible person. I don't know you as a person. You could be the sweetest, kindest, gentlest human being who's ever walked the face of the planet. But you're the kindest, sweetest, gentlest human being who's ever walked the face of the planet who can't focus on a task for 10 minutes. Or you can't motivate yourself for something that you know is going to improve your future, which is fine. But as long as we can be honest about what it is, and that's a hard thing for us to do because so often, honesty feels like criticism. Because it is. It's self-criticism. It's self-judgment. And the thing is, you don't need me to tell you that, but once I bring it up, and I throw it out there, I'm an asshole because I made you aware of it. I'm not talking about any one individual in here. I'm not talking about any one individual student. I'm putting something out there that you become aware of, and all of a sudden I become an asshole because I make you aware of something. You know? I mean, there's a way of being unaware of things. You know? I won't tell you what that is. There's a way of it. The point is, the point is to be honest with yourself and your expectations, because you're going to be happier. If this is what you want to pursue in life, that's fine. Then this stuff is just not going to be on your radar. If this is the stuff that you want to pursue in life, that's fine. And then this stuff won't be on your radar either. Only be honest with yourself. You know? We like the idea of having a lot of money. We just don't like the idea of going and getting it. We like the idea of raising a healthy, well-adjusted family. But we don't like the idea of putting in all the work that it takes to do that, because both of those two approaches is going to make us suffer in the other area. You know? And then when someone comes along and points it out, it's, well, they drink hemlock. You'll know what that means in a couple of years.